Hey guys, Jason Bodine coming at you from Gadsden, Alabama. Welcome to the channel. I practically grew up in front of a TV set. As a child of the 80s, born in 1974, I did miss the original run of Star Trek by a few years, but I did catch every single episode in syndication as a child. I entered into adulthood in the 1990s with The Next Generation and the Law and Order franchise on my screen. This video was inspired by the fans who defend modern Star Trek by saying it's always been political whenever anybody complains about its wokeness. Well, they're right. It has always been political. But there is a massive difference between the politics of the past and the wokeness of today. Today, in part one of this three-part series, I'm going to show you that difference. We're going to look at how these two franchises, Star Trek and Law and Order, transitions from holding up a mirror to the audience to shouting at them through a megaphone. And I'm going to demonstrate that this shift happened for one simple reason. Hollywood doesn't trust you anymore. When I talk about the mirror versus the megaphone, I'm talking about the soul of the story. The mirror is dialectic. It puts the story in the driver's seat. It holds up a reflection of society by presenting the friction of a social issue without a prepackaged verdict. It treats you, the viewer, like a jury. It gives you the evidence and trusts you to deliberate. The megaphone is didactic. It puts the issue in the driver's seat and shows the story bound and gagged into the trunk of the car. Didactic storytelling doesn't explore, it shouts. It tells you what to think, how to feel, and most importantly, it tells you you're a bad person if you disagree. There is no room for discussion because the narrative is monolithic. Didactic storytelling, the megaphone, is designed to manipulate, not to engage. Right away, Hollywood's distrust of the audience was a problem for me as the guy presenting the receipts. There are two clips, one from the original run of Law and Order that presents my hometown of Gadsden, Alabama as real victims worthy of justice, and one from Supernatural that treats my home state as the punchline of a derogatory joke that I wanted to show you side by side to do two important things for this series. One, demonstrate the difference between the mirror and the megaphone, and two, show that though both storytelling styles have been around since the beginning of human history, it is the weaponization of the megaphone that has become the industry standard in modern Hollywood that marks the line between entertainment that is being political and entertainment that is woke. But I can't show those clips to you. My search for them to begin presenting my case made it really clear, really fast, the lengths Hollywood will go to obscure its past so you can't judge its present. Try to find any classic Law and Order clips without either going through a paywall or waiting weeks for the right episode to cycle through on Pluto TV, and you'll either be met with the new stuff or with this ugly mug right here. Funny what years of self-righteous scowling will do to a pretty face, eh, Olivia? Seriously, honey lamb? Have that looked at because, bless your little heart, age ain't what did that to you. That is from 10 years of shouting at the very audience that you used to hold a mirror up to. If we wanted to be growled at for 40 minutes straight by a bulldog with an enema, we'd all go down to the animal shelter and volunteer. And despite the fact that people remember seeing it aired and the lasting effects it had that we'll talk about when we go beyond the writer's room in part two, The only remaining record of the exchange I wanted to show you from Supernatural is this meme. Yeah, Dean, your creators may not want the fans to see it, but this Bama boy has a long memory, son. I saw it on the air, both in the original run and in syndication. And Chuck ain't the only one who can party. I'll deal with you in part 2. Effective strategy, too. Just try to find a Law and Order reaction video on YouTube. A Supernatural fan who can remember the exact episode of that exchange, or even an AI that isn't convinced it never happened in the first place. But classic clips be damned. As a YouTuber, a Southerner with a stubborn streak, and a proud Bama boy, it is my duty, my honor, and my privilege to shove Hollywood's megaphone straight up its. The truth remains the truth, and I'm going to show it to you regardless. Now, let's look at some examples from the Star Trek and Law and Order franchises to see how the mirror shifted to the megaphone. The first thing any defender of new Star Trek who says it's always been political points to whenever somebody complains about it being woke is the original episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Case in point.
Charon cadet as well. So the Charon were introduced in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, half white, half black, all, big thing about racism in the 60s. Oh, sorry, we don't do politics in Star Trek, do we?
Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is arguably one of the most powerful episodes of the original series. It showed us the absurdity of racism through the conflict between Beale and Lokai, the last two members of the Charon race, whose sole difference between them was which half of their bodies was black and which half was white. The episode didn't end in goodness and light and rainbows, with Captain Kirk saving the day with some moral sermon. It ended in tragedy, with Beale and Lokai fighting their species into extinction, while all the Enterprise crew could do was watch. Fast forward to 2026, and what do you see in the Star Trek Starfleet Academy promo but a female Charon? And then there's the Next Generation episode, The Outcast, which introduces us to an androgynous race that has evolved beyond gender identity and in whose society it is illegal to identify as male or female. Will Riker falls in love with one of them, Soren, who secretly identifies as a female. When her people discover her secret, she is sentenced to brainwashing to make her normal. Riker tries to save her. He fails, and Soren is brainwashed. No goodness, no light, no rainbows and bunny rabbits, no Julie Andrews whirling like a dervish on the bridge of the Enterprise singing about acceptance. Just a tragic and powerful allegory about gender identity and the horrors of conversion therapy. We didn't care about Soren because of her gender identity. We cared because the story let us see her through Will Riker's eyes. Cut to today, and we have Bodine, an openly gay, pacifist Klingon. But his difference isn't a backstory. It is the story. So yes, Sean, you little Irish garden gnome, Star Trek has always been political. We don't need your smug little lectures to tell us what we already know. But it hasn't always been woke. It crossed that line when it not only retconned its most powerful warning against racism for the sake of diversity, but made her the same coloring as Lokai, the original episode's stand-in for the oppressed minorities, and when it sacrificed the story for the sake of representation through Bodine. We'll talk more about Jaden and the Charon Cadet in part 2 when we go beyond the writer's room. Now, let's look at Law and Order. If I had to pick a non-fantasy or sci-fi series to call my favorite, Law and Order would be it, hands down. Now, we all watched SVU fall victim to the megaphone in the post-Stabler years with flat, preachy, one-sided storylines, but the original run of the flagship series and the first 12 seasons of the Prime spinoff were a masterclass in using the mirror for world building and storytelling. Characters were written like real people with real lives who had real opinions shaped by their lives, their backgrounds, and the world around them. And most important, sometimes those opinions clashed with each other as they worked together to uphold the one overriding force in all their lives, the law. When political and social issues did enter into the fray, they were handled within the framework of the story and weren't the focus. When Lieutenant Anita Van Buren sued the NYPD because a white woman with less seniority got promoted and she didn't, it was handled in the background. You knew it was going on, but there was no long, drawn-out on-screen plot surrounding it. Just throwaway mentions that took a back seat to whatever case was at hand. Now, if you're like me and you enjoy storytelling that engages your mind to think, you were absolutely thrilled to see the return of the original flagship series to the airwaves after 10 years of Olivia Benson's self-righteous prattling. Until you watched it, that is. Aside from the title, the setting, and a couple of legacy characters that carried over from the original series to the new run at first, this wasn't the Law and Order you remembered. The one that managed to keep you engaged enough to keep coming back and keep the series on the air for 20 years. That said, unlike the Star Trek segment we just covered in the previous segment, where we could easily narrow the shift from the Mirror to the Megaphone down to the change in the tone and focus of the narrative, it's a lot harder to know where to focus with the Law and Order franchise precisely because it did such a masterful job in character and world building. The world it built was such a complex and complete mirror of our own that the shift from the Mirror to the Megaphone represents a complete reality shift that it would take me hours to cover in full. A reality shift so complete, in fact, that in terms of the Star Trek franchise we just covered, watching an episode from the original run next to an episode of the revival feels like stepping into the Mirror, or should I say Megaphone universe. We went from a world of fleshed out characters with conflicting opinions where characters were allowed to disagree with each other and the focus was on the law above all else, to one where legacy characters got complete personality transplants. Everybody has the same stance on everything, and the focus is on the social justice target of the week. I mean, in the first season alone, we saw Anthony Anderson's detective Kevin Bernard go from a fairly conservative, traditional cop with an IA background in the original run to lecturing his new partner, Frank Cosgrove, in the revival series on race relations every 5 damn minutes. And we saw Sam Waterston's Jack McCoy go from a DA in the vein of his predecessors, Adam Schiff, Nora Lewin, and Arthur Branch, who were not afraid to rein their prosecutors in when they got out of line in the original run, to a doormat who lets the lunatics, especially this whiny little dipshit lunatic, Nolan Price, run the asylum. Hey, Nolan, let me tell you something, boy. You make Anakin Skywalker look almost mature and dignified by comparison. I have heard less whining and hot air come out of a deflating balloon. You are a prosecutor, not a social worker. Get with the program. And on top of that, you know how many non-political episodes that had nothing to do with politics whatsoever happened in the first 3 seasons? 3. That's how many. Guess how many of those episodes happened in the first season of The Revival? 0. Now, let's look at some episodes so you can see the difference and tell where the shift from the mirror to the megaphone happened. There are a lot, and I do mean a lot of episodes to draw from in the original run to show a contrast between it and the revival. But a good chunk of those are more fit for part 2. So for now, let's focus on an episode from each that shows the shift in how each iteration of the flagship series handles conflict and dissent. In the season 17 episode Fear America, Detectives Ed Green and Nina Cassidy are investigating the death of a victim beheaded on camera by an alleged white supremacist group. When it eventually comes to light that the real culprits may be a Middle Eastern cell, Green and Cassidy, in true Mirror fashion, have a discussion about racial profiling right there on screen for you to judge. They don't agree. But there's no lecture and nobody's running to HR. They just move on from it and do their jobs like adults. Cut to season 23, episode 1, and you find out from Detective Jalen Shaw, who came onto the scene when Bernard left and is even worse than he was about giving lectures, in a single throwaway line that Cosgrove, who had been the one and only character in the entire Revival series, who was allowed to be a free thinker with a different opinion, had been fired for being, quote-unquote, too honest. Gee, Jalen, I wonder who tattled on him to make that happen. Did you go crying to Mama because you couldn't handle a partner who disagreed with you?
That's right, Sally. Go cry to Mama.
What are you, 2 years old? Grow up, you overgrown man baby. It's a homicide investigation, not a sensitivity training seminar. See the difference? In the season 17 episode, we saw an on-screen conflict between 2 characters that didn't get in the way of the job. That's how the Mirror handles it. Whereas in the season 23 episode, the conflict is hand-waved away off-screen. That's how the megaphone does it, because it doesn't trust you not to agree with that dissent. It's also worth pointing out that, since, as always happens when it's the megaphone telling a story, the characters are mouthpieces for the writers, that line about Cosgrove being, quote-unquote, too honest is a tacit admission on the part of the writers that they're lying to you. But we'll cover that in part 2 as well. In this episode of Hollywood Doesn't Trust You Anymore, we covered the what, the when, and the where of the Hollywood megaphone. You saw what the mirror and the megaphone are and what they do. You saw the transition from one to the other happen. You figured out on your own that it's still happening even now every time you turn on your TV, and you found out that it's all happening because Hollywood doesn't trust you to make adult judgments. But then How could they when they're acting like children themselves? Whining about, it's not fair, Mommy! Boo-hoo. There's a reason Starfleet Academy was canceled, and Law and Order is sitting on a bubble that may well burst beneath it right now, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, the same Hollywood that doesn't trust you to come to the right conclusion needs it spelled out for them. And, well, that's been the whole point of this exercise now, hasn't it? Join me next time when we'll talk about the how, the who, and the why in part 2. Beyond the writer's room, they're manipulating you. This has been Jason Bodine coming to you from Gadsden, Alabama. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe and tap that notification bell if you'd like to support the channel. And I'll see you for the next one. Peace.